Thank you for joining us on this episode of MSP 1337, a podcast dedicated to helping MSPs and their clients navigate cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a journey, but it doesn't mean you have to travel alone. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, IT Pro TV. Looking to keep your techs up to date with the latest IT skills without having to pay for pricey conferences and boot camps? Online IT training is the answer, and IT Pro TV is the market leader. IT Pro TV, online IT training that's so engaging, it's binge-worthy. Now on with the show. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined this week by Frank McGovern and Stel Valavanis from Blueteamcon. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having.
Yeah. Hey.
So in a second here, I'll have Frank share with the audience what Blueteamcon is. But real quick, I wanted to stage the topic for today's conversation, which is going to be hoodies versus suits and what all that entails, as this was a byproduct coming out of the recent Blueteamcon conference where an unstructured session sprung up called Hoodie versus Suits. Frank, talk to us a little bit about what is Blueteamcon and how Blue Team came about.
Yeah, so Blueteamcon is a conference really made for defenders of organizations, but it really expands on what Blue Team really means and trying to redefine what that term means. What our goal was, we were going around to a lot of the cybersecurity conferences, and many are very hacker focused or teaching you how to exploit something or about vulnerabilities. And there were some in there that would teach you how to be a little more of a secure environment, but they were just, scattered throughout these conferences. It wasn't the main focus of the cons that we were going to.
So essentially those would be red team exercises as opposed to blue team.
That's correct.
Okay.
And what we were finding was the ones that were Blue Team focused were more DoD driven, or they were owned by a vendor. So it was really just more about their product and how it can help secure your environment.
Sure.
There was nothing that was wide open in a large conference for the defenders that would create this ecosystem of community. A lot of the ones that the Blue Teamers are still the more traditional type conferences where you go sit down at a table with a few people and you just see talks all day for 8 hours straight and you leave. And you come in business casual clothing, right? And it's just like a business event. It's not really this building of community that the hacker cons had. So what I'm trying to do is build that same type of mentality for a conference on our side.
So this, to some degree, is where we want to take today's episode. But what you're saying really makes, in my head, resonates with. You're almost describing what traditionally in a Blue Team conference would look like is a lot of people that are older, really on a quantity level, not necessarily that there aren't younger people there, but the demographics would be largely made up of people that have been in the space 10 plus years, which means that they're not 25. And so they wouldn't have that perspective like we do today when we think hacker. And, first thing I think about, and this is aging me, but the movie Hackers, right? Like the first time Angelina Jolie was in a movie that people knew about. And, it was all of the phone freaking and, having the books and really old school hacker. And of course, large parts of that movie were totally so far outlandish. So with my dial-up modem, I'm going to take down, that level of infrastructure. But the point was, even with that movie, it stereotyped hackers being sort of the kids or the young people. And in that same movie, those that were responsible for large infrastructures were represented as older people.
Well, basically, the Blue Team was the IT department, Chris.
Right.
So, I don't know, Frank. When do you think the idea of a Blue Team cybersec kind of really first came out or really first coalesced? I don't know.
Oh, that gets into a whole debate. I've had this debate online before, but I personally believe cybersecurity has become mainstream in the last 15, 20 years.
Sure.
I think people were doing secure things before, but actually having cybersecurity titles. I forget who the first person was. It's losing me, but it was a while ago, but it didn't become more this mainstream. Everybody's talking about it. Even people not in the space know it now. Like my mom's a teacher and she knows about cybersecurity now, right?
Right.
That didn't exist 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago.
Well, it's funny you say that because I remember my first job in the early 2000s. I got hired as a systems administrator. And that meant I was in charge of the web application development. I was in charge of the SharePoint folder. I was in charge of, laptops being deployed. There was no segmentation when someone said systems administrator or IT person. It was largely like everything kind of got dumped into, we're still not creative enough to come up with good titles.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I mean, I've worked at 2 Fortune 100 companies now, and I was the first titled cybersecurity person at the last company, and that was only 7 or 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the company I'm at now formalized cybersecurity as an entire department only 6 or 7 years ago, and we're a Fortune 48, $60 billion financial company.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this comes back
know the
to
names though.
What's that? Go ahead. Sorry,
it's
Stel.
important to know that the names like blue team versus red team come from wargaming. Like the red team were the attackers, blue team the defenders when they would do a live or tabletop war game exercise in the military.
Yeah, and part of Blueteamcon is trying to help understand that, if we take it back to what is Blue Team, I view it as like this culmination of people that are working towards defending an organization's assets. So if you really look at that, the title doesn't really matter. What matters is the work you're doing. So if you're like an IT person at a high school, you're the person implementing antivirus, installing group policy and configuring it. So you're a blue teamer. So are you an auditor? You're the one looking at making sure that everyone's following compliance requirements and regulatory requirements. So you're defending the organization assets by doing that. So you're a blue team. And then it even goes over to these offensive security people. I mean, they're not black hats. They're not criminals, right? The red teamers that we hire and these firms we hire to help us do pen tests, red team engagements, etc., they're helping defending organizations' assets. So I really classify them as blue team as well. So that's
because they're not bad guys.
Yeah, correct. So my argument is I'm not trying to draw a line by calling it Blue Team Con. I'm trying to make it more realistic that everyone understands we're all on the same team, actually.
Well, I think so. Attending Blueteamcon, which was a great conference, by the way, I really enjoyed the stand-up conversations in the hallway, the networking. The event was well put on. Congrats to both of you.
All the volunteers, man.
Yeah,
oh my god!
Yeah. It was fun.
Our board rocks. We have rock star board. I mean,
but the reason I'm bringing up more than plugging Blueteamcon, which is always good, is that one of the sessions that I sat through really talked about really the essence of what you're talking about and why Blueteamcon came about. And that was red team isn't bad team. Red team is the misunderstood side of the defense that you're describing that makes us all sort of part of the same blue team, right? We're all responsible for defending. The part that was, I think that has been largely missed culturally is that when someone says auditor, we think negative, right? When we think, vulnerability assessment, we think they're looking for what I did wrong. When we talk about all of those things, and then we get into full on penetration testing, the idea here is that they're going to find something that it was my responsibility to protect. Yeah. And I think what you're saying, and really is important for our listeners to hear, is that these are what allow us to become better at what we do and improve our security posture. So when the real bad guys, which we could just say are really more of the black team, if you will, there's no color, they just kind of operate on their own sort of set of rules. You're ready, or more ready than you are today, because if you don't know about it, it's probably getting exploited.
It gives us freedom.
Yeah, it gives us freedom. Right.
Nice stuff.
Yeah, nice plug there.
I agree that it's an understanding that this all makes us better. If you're working for an organization where you don't get the best results in a pen test and you're let go because of that, it's not an organization you want to work for anyway, because they have massive cultural problems.
Sure.
These assessments and all these tools are meant to make you better and protect your organization as the end goal.
So along those same lines, before we get into the actual hoodies versus suits, I think similarly to a penetration test, finding, a failure on my part, right? I didn't close all the ports and we're correcting that. I think there's a other side of that too, is you've had a breach, you've had a ransomware attack. It's shut your company down. one of the things that drives me nuts is that you get into the conversation as we're trying to rebuild and bring things back to life. And they're like, we're firing that company. These 2 employees are fired. These are all things that are happening in real time. And you're like, wait a second, time out. I'm not proposing that there aren't repercussions for poor decision-making or ignorance or negligence. But if that's being done when you're trying to recover, then you're in the same boat as if it was an exercise and you fired somebody because they didn't do a better job.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think we need to move away from that if I'm a hiring manager, I'm probably going to bring on the person that's been through an incident or a breach.
Yep.
Compared to the one that hasn't, because the lessons learned there are extreme. And that person, especially in a CISO position, no CISO wants to be the person that went as a CISO at 2 different companies and got breached, right?
Right.
So if it happens to them once, I can really depend on them that they're probably never going to let that happen again.
Well, as a CISO, virtual CISO, in many of the opportunities I work with, I love being brought in post breach, because then I know that everybody's rowing in the same direction to prevent breach from happening again, versus being brought in and saying, we just want to prevent bad things from happening. And yeah, our budget's only, so big. And then of course it's my fault when we don't spend enough money to really, lock things down. Right.
Exactly.
So guys, this is what really had me. I've been thinking about this probably since I brought up to Stel, I wanted to do a blue team. The hoodies versus suits has been like from the beginning what I wanted to talk about. And actually twice today already, I've had conversations with MSPs and IT service providers that are dealing with employees that are jumping ship to go somewhere else for, a better piece of the pie, if you will. And the piece of the pie is literally a sliver because it's like $2,000 more than they were making. But if we look around us post COVID or even still living through COVID, you can see a huge gap in the number of resources available to fill positions, both in the SMB and the enterprise space. And so I wanted to talk about sort of the cultural gap. It goes back to what you said, Frank, at the beginning about how red team and hacker and community, and it was largely made up of that sort of younger group, and looking at like a blue team is collectively more focused on, I'm used to sitting in a room all day. Maybe I'll get something I can use, but I'm looking forward to the networking cocktail party because it's free booze. Talk to me guys a little bit about what you're seeing, Stel, with onshore. One would argue you're still somewhat in the SMB space as an organization, versus Frank with I know for your day job, like your company, you said you're a financial institution that's like very, very large. And then of course, say my company is just me, right? Or even the school district that I'm at, we maybe have 300-400 employees. When I went to hire this beginning of the school year, I put out a job posting. I let it sit out there for 30 days. I had 1 applicant. Great benefits. I'm looking for someone that's got some IT chops and some security understanding. But regardless of how far we go down the cybersecurity path versus like operational IT, there's a huge, huge gap. So talk to me a little bit about sort of the bridging the gap, if you will, because I think if I was to go apply for a job today and what's in my head, I'm okay living in both spaces. I've been around long enough, I'm not 25, but those that I think are under the age of 35 today, I think there's a large amount of intimidation. Stel, I know you're looking at hiring a guy right now who literally asked me today, he's like, am I worth it? And I'm like, what do you mean, are you worth it? I wouldn't recommend you to apply for a job that I didn't think you were qualified for. But this goes back to what I think is part of the cultural problem is we have a lot of people in the enterprise space that, or I should say, it's not necessarily enterprise, but older, that don't necessarily value the skill set and qualifications that these guys and girls, men and women, are developing as they grow in the space, right? Because it's hard to look at it and go, I can tangibly tell you that because of what you've learned over the last 12 months, because of the ransomware you went through or the breach, that you've increased that skill set that makes you that much more valuable to whatever the opportunity is. So what are you guys seeing? Like, I really struggle with this. Like, are you hiring the suit? Are you hiring the hacker? How do we get them to not carry those stereotypes with them?
I think there's an underlying kind of, I don't want to call it a flaw, but like a condition that permeates through all of IT in how people get introduced to it. And that's, let's say there's two categories of the way people get introduced to it. And one is, they're a nerd and they're into it and they're a gamer, whatever, they play around with stuff when they're young and, that grows into something. And then the other, it would be, well, at some point in their lives, they chose it as a career and started getting training and whatnot. And sometimes those overlap, obviously. And really, I mean, for a while, there was like an MIS degree or something like that. But even there, like really generally very little exposure to what kind of leadership and oversight looks like. I mean, I'm not just talking about like an MBA type leader, which frankly, plenty of CIOs and even CISOs like have MBAs or sought out MBAs,
And for the record, actually, that's what I actually got a degree. My bachelor's of science is an MIS degree. Not a Mrs., just MIS.
And you can, confirm or correct me on like to what extent they expose you to things like, look, a lot of your job is going to be, making sense of data, making sense of policy, thinking about how, the business is impacted, insurance, risk management. It's very kind of wide, like a business position is. And then, so when you see that, or you get a glimpse of it, the people that are quote unquote the hoodies, who are more the people who learn on their own, which I can make a good lot of arguments of how that's preferable. But even the people that got in and got schooling and whatnot, because of that lack of visibility, they see a big gap there. They don't, and they especially don't see the value they bring to it.
Sure.
And that is so completely backwards. And as a result, I have seen people in leadership positions that don't have the technical backing, and they're weak too. And, what I want to see is a bridge. This isn't the only bridge. But that one bridge, like, please, all you nerds, someday you kind of, I don't want to say grow up or whatever. Someday, your career development, some of you, it makes a ton of sense to go in that kind of leadership direction, even if it's just toeholds into it, because you bring tons of value to the table.
Right.
And none of this stuff is out of your reach. So anyway, that's kind of the one.
It's like saying the jock versus pocket protector, right? Like there's some truth to that. The assumption that because the say being the nerd, if you will, was frowned upon, a lot of younger people, especially going back to my generation, going through and getting an MIS degree, I was classified or tagged as the nerd because of the type of classes that I was taking that were definitely not preparing me to be in a leadership position. They were preparing me for more of that engineering, like technical side that, had it been more of a hybrid, would have been an amazing, I would have started where I needed to be at, 21, 22.
I mean, Frank, you yourself, your own story is exactly that. You had to somehow, I remember a time you and I spoke at a conference. It was a Chicago one, a very suit kind of conference. And I was kind of grilling you. You're saying, "Oh, I want to be CISO." I'm like, I'm grilling you. I'm like, okay, here are the things a CISO has to do. Do you remember that conversation?
I do.
And I was trying to tell you, like, Frank, this is totally, for one thing, my opinion is that's what's easy. If you can handle the nerd stuff, you can handle the business stuff or whatever, but you still have to have a stomach for it. Yeah. And I just saw your eyes light up. I'm like, this is what you have to think like. This is where you have to go. And you did it. I mean, your path. Tell us your path. What moved you into
real quick? I want to add to that. So think about getting a CISP certification. I think Frank, you have it, correct?
Yep. Correct.
So one of the things that I have been warned repeatedly, Chris, when you get the CISP, when you choose to finally finish that process, it will change your mindset, and not necessarily in a good way as it pertains to handling cybersecurity, because it's a shift to a business mindset, not a technical engineering mindset. Would you say that's true, Frank?
I would say that's true. And that's also true of my career path moving up. I started as a network security engineer, or just like a network engineer, network infrastructure. And I was going down the path of doing infrastructure. I was really interested in doing routing and switching.
I think you and I had conversations about that when you were making these decisions.
Yeah, correct. Because I was going through my degree, which was in information system security, And so I started off learning infrastructure and networking, and I was really focused on that. I really liked it. And then I started learning security stuff. And then how I kind of pushed my last organization to develop security and a team and everything was already being in infrastructure, learning networking, doing help desk stuff, kind of learning how IT in general works. And then I would poke at things from a security perspective.
Sure.
As I would learn them in a class, I would bring that to the enterprise that I was working at and say, hey, we should fix this, or we should do this. And just over time, by pointing those things out, eventually I just brought up that, I want a security title. Like I'm liking the space. This is the space I want to be in.
Yeah.
And I pushed for that. And that's what they did. So they made me the security person. And then we hired more security people, and we kind of grew from there. But just naturally over time, by being such a small security department in a Fortune 100 large company, I had to take on the things Stel's talking about, where I had to move. And like you're saying, and the CISP teaches you, is move to these it's not really manager, I would say. It's just these higher level risk decisions, and understanding that everything is becoming risk management, and everything's also centralizing around identity.
I think you said it. I would say it is a business component, because the reality is when you are living in the security space, your focus is fundamentally about securing the asset at all costs, right? Because you're not being given the responsibility to think on the probability of the risk. You're thinking about, ideally, this is what we do to lock it down. I saw this meme the other day, and it was like, I figured out how to 100% guarantee all of our servers are secure. And the person responds, how did you manage to do that? And he goes, I shut all the servers off. So right, like that's actually the mindset that if you're in the engineering part of this, and your security title, as opposed to the guy that's responsible for making sure that your staff can print, you would feel like, hey, 100% success. I can sleep at night because there's no access. They're off. Right. But now you shift into the business space, and it's like, okay, well, how long can that server be off before we start losing money and go out of business? And that's the space that you're in. I think for me, I've really struggled with wanting to finish the CIS part, not because I'm afraid of, say passing it per se, but there are a few domains that I haven't touched because I don't want to change my current way of thinking about the problem.
Yeah. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Engineers love to find the minute use cases and solve all these crazy problems, and never look at it from a risk business perspective.
Correct.
So that it's just, it is a constant debate. So my role is a network architect now at a large company, and I've gone through the GRC space. I know how that area works. But yeah, I get in constant battles with the engineers trying to solve minute use cases. And when I break it down and show them risk management and giving what you're telling me, giving it like a score based off what I'm trying to tell you and give you that a score, you'll see that this is a 79, but what you're telling me is a 13. We can't worry about the 13. We need to worry about what's the 79. Right. That's what we need to solve.
Right. And so like this kind of is kind of a segue to sort of that next piece. There's not enough of both, right? And kind of, I think my hope, and I think I've heard this come from both of you, is that we would do away with the hoodie and the suit and make this more about, we're on equal footing. We're part of the same team. We're all wearing the same jersey, as opposed to, completely different outfits. You don't want to be the one that stands out, right? Like you don't look like the referee when everybody's wearing jerseys, right?
Maybe
what does it look? What's that?
Maybe it's polo shirts.
Yeah, sure. Polo shirts. Then we all look like we work at the Geek Squad.
I know. I hate them. I know.
Right. So along those lines, look, I feel like that's kind of the segue to what do we look for when we hire? And I'm going to say, let's rule out for a minute the size of the organization, because I think we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, well, it's that you are a qualified individual. You need to stop being intimidated about your skill set. Stel and I were working on this earlier, a job posting that literally was so granular for a role in a director of security position that you're going through it. And one of the bullet points was needs to be competent with Microsoft Office is one of the requirements. And I'm like, we just established that I've got to have 15 plus years of experience, and you want me to have an MBA. You do realize that the cybersecurity space hasn't existed long enough for all of these things to apply. So 15 years of experience in cybersecurity is kind of like saying, yeah, I used to be an auto mechanic and then I was a barista. That's 7 years. I'll add that to the end of the 7 I've got in cybersecurity. Does that count? I mean, I try not to spill coffee in my lap. That's a security concern. Like, what do you guys look for? Because I feel like I just described an extreme case.
Isn't that what Alyssa got into? Alyssa did an unconference. It was a really. Were you there, Frank, at Alyssa's?
I wasn't there, but yeah, I think she's done blog posts and stuff and about this area, and I think multiple people have.
Yeah, she was yeah. Well, in her talk, she was criticizing these, like, everything is like must have, and some of them are a little bit ridiculous, and she basically telling people ignore that, apply anyways.
Yeah. The certifications is another one. Literally, that same job posting had in it requirements for CISP, and then it listed off like 3 or 4 other ones, and I'm like, but those contradict me being a CISP. Like,
yeah, and I think yes, this is a fight I put on, and many others do, but we really need to stop doing these hard requirements, and especially if you list a tool in a job description, you're doing it wrong. Just let's put that main line requirement out there. Stop listing tools. Anybody can learn any tool that exists. Nothing's too hard.
Right.
You need to be hiring personality in person, and that's what you really need to be looking at. We need to be looking at more at these soft skills, people call them. Yeah, it's okay if you want to put down that someone has 15 years experience, or hopefully they have a CISP, but every one of those requirements should trail off with or equivalent. Right?
Well, I think it also says a lot too when you put a job description for a job posting. What's the job role? Because it's really easy to put bullet points and say, competent skills, works well with others. But when you start talking about I don't know that a lot of companies actually know what the outcome of a productive CISO looks like. Because I'll just give you an example. As a fractional CISO, I have one client where we get on a call and all we talk about is the concerns they have with what they just saw in the media. And I'm like, you do realize we have all these other things to focus on. They're like, we want you to focus on this with us, because we use this conversation to help avoid the panicking, if you will, from our staff. And the cell phone is a good example. Client, all their employees were AT&T customers. They wanted to know what do we say to the employees that we buy phones for that are all on AT&T? Are we switching? I'm like, well, you went to Target yesterday. Why did you go to Target? I mean, they had a way worse breach than AT&T just did. That's what they're looking for. So if you know what the expectations are, I think we would see more people applying for jobs. I will tell you right now, if I was applying for a job today, things that I would avoid are companies that say must be willing to travel and not have it be clear. They want you to do things like you're responsible for building and running our IT department. Awesome. You don't have one. I mean, you see that all the time. To manage the existing team. Okay, well, who's on the team? What's their skill set and qualifications? Because if I'm walking into, I got to do 4 other people's jobs until I get their skill set up, I'm not interested in that job opportunity.
Yeah, I agree that the industry in general just still does not understand the CISO role. And we see that by the majority of CISOs don't report to the CEO. And many CISOs, and people will argue oh, well, I report to the COO and that's good enough, or that's the equivalent. And it's not. That's them downplaying the role. And
I'm not even sure. I'll disagree. I want to disagree with you for a second, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. So this is what I'm going to say. This is the problem. We're throwing around the word "see anything." I believe the security officer is the person that needs to have a seat at the table, and that whatever that security officer is saying is being heard by whoever's in that key decision-making stakeholder role. Because if I have to share it with somebody else to then share it with the stakeholders, then we have a fundamental problem, because whatever I say is going to be diluted to suit their best interest.
Yeah, you've added latency into the equation. And
absolutely.
Yes, I completely agree. Whoever owns the risks ultimately should be in the room with the security person that's in charge of security for your organization. And if those two are not in a room together, and someone isn't man in the middle or a woman in the middle, it's wrong.
And you just described, I think the hoodie suit thing is that culturally, we don't want to elevate somebody who has 4 or 5 years as opposed to 20 to a C-level status. And I don't really care. That's a different conversation, right? But the reality is, this is the person that you have tasked with protecting the entire organization. So Are you not going to have them in the room telling you what needs to be done? Or are you going to be like, you tell, and they will tell, and they will tell. And, when I consider it to be worth my time, I'll listen.
Yeah, I think there is definitely the challenge, a whole different discussion on getting just to that C-level title of CISO, because, if we look back 100 years, CEO, CFO, COO, have always existed, and it's a good boys club, and they don't want to add another person to the good boys club because
that's a very good way to say it.
Traditionally these people like power, and they view that as a loss of power if one of those people are not controlling who the CISO or security person is. They don't really want to add another seat to the table.
So obviously Blueteamcon is helping shape the future of this. Final closing thoughts, because we could have gone, for another hour talking about some of these pieces. I'll go with you first, Stel. Closing thoughts on how do we close the gap? I think more from the standpoint of getting the right resources on the team than whether or not that person has a seat at some imaginary table. That's a secondary problem.
Well, I call on all conference organizers to include kind of career discussion, career development, ideally like a workshop or something. We did a resume workshop with some real rock star people in the industry, whatnot. Definitely keep inclusiveness up there. We're talking about gender and BIPOC groups because they're all too easily kind of dismissed. So just make sure they're front center. So those efforts there, we're doing it, and we're going to notch it up. Wait till you see next year, because we're really got some great ideas out there.
Counting on it.
Oh my! And this board is like on fire. This board is like absolutely determined to like just not just follow, to lead, in that regard. So yeah, let me put that request out. And then secondly, the request is to the Blue Team taker, woo. The request is to people on kind of both sides, suit and hoodies, go to each other's events. You could start light, local stuff, virtual stuff, whatever, just to be there culturally. If you're like, I don't need to know about some kind of, whatever technical detail thing. Well, appear just to be kind of part of it, especially if there's an opportunity to network, and vice versa. You're a hoodie. You're like, I'm a practitioner. I'm a techie. I don't care about this. Go to a GRC event, go to like a networking event that maybe a vendor sponsors, and it's going to be some salespeople, trying to, buy you dinner or whatever, but really you will benefit from that because you kind of mix the culture and in fact, I would say you affect the culture. So there you go. Please.
I think that's great. I think you just to recap, I feel like you said two things that are really important. One is don't be intimidated and overwhelmed by the idea that this is a conference or a topic that's outside of your wheelhouse, because the only way you're going to develop those skills is by getting involved and asking questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And anyways, I see very little of it so far. Yeah.
I agree. All right, Frank, what do you got? Closing thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I agree. The building of community is the big one here, and breaking down those barriers and those walls. I mean, I don't think we publicly posted this, but we did a random sample of 200 of our tickets at Blueteamcon, and 50 of those 200 were CISO or director level, 50 were architect or manager level, and around 50 were engineer analyst level. So that's a great spread. The rest were students or joke titles or no title at all. So that's about what the spread looks like. And I think we need more events like this. That's bringing them together in a safe, inclusive environment that's more relaxed, so they can talk with each other and share feelings. And then on the flip side, I think my second thing would be that hiring managers need to hire the person and personality. So we can start lifting more people up and getting more people in the industry. Don't discount that people's ability to learn if you hire the right person. You don't need to hire the person that has 5 to 6 years experience in security. Anybody can learn it. It just takes time and helping build those people up.
Yeah. So just to recap, I think you said really it's about culture and community and building up people that otherwise may not get exposed to the opportunity to be on your team, who may be the best candidate and they've never even really worked in cybersecurity. I can say, I think for me, having, worked for Onshore and worked with you in the past, I can vividly remember when I came over to Onshore and the first thing on my plate, Stel asked me to read the Baldridge document. And I was like, I read through it and I'm like, man, this like pretty clearly articulates how you should approach handling risk. Why is this not part of like every organization's like process for identifying and managing risk? Oh, well, because not everybody wants to read. So if you've got somebody that's like, hey, I'll tackle that. I want to learn that. very quickly you can become, I think, an expert on the compliance side, even if you don't have the chops yet on the actual evidence and security side. They go hand in hand, but I don't think that you necessarily have to get them in one sequential. It's not linear necessarily.
Yeah, we need to. Sorry.
And even though, for us, like our upmarket clients buy those services more from us, because they have compliance pressures and whatnot. Oh, you wait and see. The SMB space is going to really start getting pressure from, CISA, and even if they don't get it from SEC, they're going to get it from government and government as a vendor, organization. So yeah, let's get busy understanding kind of risk management.
You just saw the new safe harbor laws that are coming out. There's 5 states now that if you have any of the approved frameworks, CIS, CMMC, and there were a couple others, and you can show proof when bad things happen, you are being protected by the state so that you are not being sued or, frivolous lawsuits being brought against you because of something that maybe could have been avoided, knowing that there is no perfect, secure environment that's going to stay secure all the time.
Yeah, because that's going to have some other kind of repercussions too, but it is the right thing to do.
It helps, right? It says I'm willing to work with you, knowing that my risk isn't so catastrophically high that bad things happen, my doors close.
Right. Yeah, right. But these come with breach disclosure too. I don't know what insurance companies are going to do. I think it's going to really raise premiums a lot, and which I don't like, but I think it's the right thing.
Well, I think the idea that because I have insurance, it'll pay the claim is naive and ignorant in and of itself.
Exactly. People are really
underwriting is completely changing in that space.
Absolutely,
starting to cover a lot of things.
And remember, they're all friends. They're all friends, right? What is it, like the roughly 200 of the big ones? They're all under the same Lloyd's of London, so it's not like you this one's not going to work. You're going to go to the next one. They all talk to each other.
And we're all in the same camp, likely to say, hey, transparency is very valuable. Yep. Like, we should all be talking about problems and breaches, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but I have been involved in multiple incidents. And 100% across the board, the insurance company and the lawyers are like, you shut your mouth.
Right.
100%. And I've had to fight those guys before and to oppose that. I'm like, no way.
I don't want to cut you off, but I'm seeing that there is an episode in the future that is Stel with his gloves off as we go after the insurance space.
What? I'll invite my friend. I won't name names. Attorney in the insurance industry.
I think that would be a great. It is a conversation that comes up all the time. So that would be great. Guys, I really appreciate that you were on this episode of MSP 1337. All of those out there listening, have a great week.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you guys.